Nick Freeman joins us now. Good morning to you, Nick.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning. So what are you concerned about when it comes to cyclists?
Well, we're sharing their vulnerability. They're extremely vulnerable. They were recently ranked next to pedestrians number 2 in the sort of arena of the most vulnerable road users. They're more prevalent, which is good because it's healthy, environmentally friendly. There are huge benefits from people cycling. But we want to make sure that the roads are safe for everybody. And to me, there are huge areas which need to be looked at. One of the areas is the fact that there is actually no speed limit for cyclists. So it's particularly relevant in the context that if you drive around London, you crawl at 20 miles an hour and you're undertaken and overtaken by cyclists. And I'm sure you'll be aware, Jonathan, that when they drafted this new highway code, in order to try and ensure safety, they actually suggested as a guideline a minimum distance for cars to overtake cyclists. And up to 30 miles an hour, you need to be at least 1.5 meters from the cyclist, to make sure that if there was the cyclist leaned or was distracted, to ensure he was safe. You drive around London, and if you have a camera attached to your car, or you're just videoing from the pavement, and you watch cyclists, they sit on car bumpers, they squeeze themselves on the near side, they squeeze themselves on the off side. They're often going far faster than 20 miles an hour.
Are they? How is it possible to ride a bike faster than 20 miles an hour?
Very easily, Jonathan.
Is it? I don't know.
Yeah,
well, I ride a what I consider a vicar's bike, Nick. It's only got 3 gears, and if I was going 20 miles an hour, I think my legs would fall off.
Well, I think you answered your question. I mean, look, Vickers, I think used to make gearboxes, didn't they? Or maybe even boats a long time ago. But I think there are lots of there's some very fast, lightweight, expensive bikes out there. And some cyclists cycle, at speeds of 10 to 15 miles an hour. But you do get what I call the kamikaze cyclists, the guys and girls who are lycra clad, who are bombing along at breakneck speed. And e-bikes, they're big and hefty. They can go up to with the electric motor to propel them at 15.5 miles an hour, but they're capable of going much, much faster. So the point is, you've got a highway code in place to protect cyclists, and they're the ones who are actually flouting the law, and they're overtaking and undertaking, as I say, very close, far, far closer than the suggested guideline. And the difficulty with cyclists is, apart from their vulnerability, we never know who's on the bike unless there's a very serious accident and they're detained at the time. So we live in a society now where cyclists use the roads and the pavements as, if you like, shortcuts. So I'm going to go through the red light. I'm not going to give way here at this side. I'm going to cycle on the pavement for this little bit. And how do you ever bring them to account? There are actually rules in place to say you're not allowed to, you must stop at a red light, for example. They very rarely do. They're not allowed to go on pavements, but they often do. And apart from breaking the law, even if you found who it was, there's no teeth in the legislation. We're talking about very small fines. And if you ramp it up to the most serious type of case, and there's been 1 or 2 of these that you'll remember, there was the case of a racing bike with no brakes that tragically killed the lady Kim Briggs. And the cyclist concerned was prosecuted under the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861. The maximum sentence for furious and wanton cycling was actually 2 years. I think the defendant got 10 months. Whereas if, God forbid, you're involved in a fatal accident with a car, you are looking at life imprisonment. The sentence now has increased from 14 years to life.
So in basic terms then, are you looking for bikes to have number plates so that people can be identified, and for the law to be changed so that somebody injuring someone whilst on a bike is treated as seriously as someone injuring someone in a car?
Absolutely. I'm asking the government to have complete parity of law for all road users, whether you're a cyclist, an e-scooter rider, an e-bike, a motorbike, a car driver or lorry driver.
Let's just let's just
so
explore
that's what needs to happen. So there will be penalty points, disqualification, and an accountability, which would in itself make the roads much safer.
So let's explore the negative side to that. Then the negative argument that would be put forward by cycling groups, they, I'm sure, would say to you, if you start doing that, if you start making all of these obstacles to being a cyclist, then ultimately you'll put people off riding a bike, which means that there'll be more cars on the roads and more emissions, and that's exactly what we should be trying to move away from.
Well, I think it's a case of priority. I understand that is an argument that someone's always going to mount. I mean, our roads are full of cars and you travel on them and they're very heavily congested. And we're not really, when you're saying to a cyclist, look, we'd like you, and it will be a simple procedure to have a small registration plate on the back of your bike as we do a car. Many cyclists have said to me they think it's a really good idea and they want to be held to account because they don't like the way certain cyclists cycle. In the same way, Jonathan, that responsible motorists don't like the idiots who drive cars dangerously as well. So this is all designed to make the environment better and our roads safer. And I'm very much in favour of cyclists, but I'm not in favour of there's a certain minority group of cyclists, and they're not that. I estimate there are tens of thousands of offences committed every day by cyclists, particularly in conurbations like London, big cities, where they're just not brought to account. The authorities they've got no means, no resource, no accountability. At least with a car, you have a number plate.
But isn't the problem? But isn't there are a couple of problems? I mean, we'll get on to children in just a second, and whether you feel this should also encompass them. But I'm just thinking about e-scooters. We already have a situation where it is illegal to ride an e-scooter that you've gone and bought from Curry's or wherever down a high street or a pavement, and yet we see it all the time. And the reality is, the police would say, we can't catch these people. It's impossible. If you're in a police car to catch someone on, isn't the same problem with your proposal for the bikes, that whilst the law-abiding people, who are probably not the law flouters anyway, would go through the process of having their bike registered and taking out their insurance and doing all the things that you would like them to do, there will still be this group of people who are lawless. They'll still get on a bike without a number plate, and the police will be very, very powerless to actually catch them, to hold them to account. Okay.
Well, you make a very good point, Jonathan, with e-scooters, for example. And the e-scooters, e-scooter riders, when they're rented, they have to comply with the law in exactly the same way as a car driver. So the law is there. And the problem with e-scooters is there's no means of identification. And if they had a registration plate, then they would be held to account. And any e-scooter that didn't have one would be seized by the police. And the same way that any bicycle that didn't have a registration plate, the police could seize it.
But how are the police? But if you've got somebody riding down a pavement, you know, how are you going to actually, if you're a police officer, how are you going to catch them in order to seize their bike? Because they'll just go down an alleyway, won't they? And you'll have lost them.
But it's I could say to you, Jonathan, like, what happens if you take a number plate off a car? It's far more powerful. How are you ever going to catch someone? You know, we're never going to live in a perfect system, but we have to try and make people accountable. And we have a system at the moment where there's an inadequate law in place, and even if it's enforced, they're unaccountable because we've got no real means of tracing them. That cannot be right, particularly as we want to encourage more and more cyclists to use our roads. I mean, there isn't even a drink-drive limit or a drug-drive limit for cyclists. That there is an offence of driving whilst unfit, but there's no specific limit. But the law is it's anachronistic. It needs to be brought up to date. It needs to be made relevant. And this isn't designed to discourage. It's designed to encourage people so that they feel they're in a safer place, because it's the idiots that cause the problem from everyone else's perspective.
What about children then? I said we'd get on to that. I mean, would you include children in all of this? Because surely that's going to be very problematic.
It is a difficulty, but my view is children shouldn't be on the roads unsupervised under the age of 16. It's just too dangerous a place to be. You know, how can you have children cycling on roads? They're not allowed to cycle on pavements when they don't know what the highway code is.
What about if they need to get to school by bike?
The parents need to supervise it.
But it might not be practical. I mean, if you've got a working mum and dad, and then you've got a child that is, I don't know, 14, who lives a few miles away from school, it may well be that the parents are literally not going to be around to supervise them on that journey to school. They might rely on the bike as the only way they can get to school.
Well, there are always going to be situations which are challenging. And what you're saying is the parents can't do it. There's no public transport. We're living in an area where public transport, the government tell us we're making more and more provision for public transport. To have a child of 14 on a road, on a bike, when they're probably completely unfamiliar with the highway code, they're very vulnerable. I don't believe it's safe. I understand if you live in the country and it's okay, and I understand the temptations. But, if you introduce legislation, it has to apply to everybody. My view is that the 16 is the cut-off period because, there might be children who are even younger than 14 who want to cycle to school. At what age do you say, no, it's dangerous, or do you just let the parents decide? So I feel that we need to have the same law enforced for all road users.
Okay.
And there will be advantages and there will be some disadvantages. I acknowledge that. There is nothing that's perfect. And we're never going to, there are thousands of motorists every day who commit offences who are not brought to account as well. But at least we have a system in place where we try and hold people to account. At the moment, we do not have any system in place that holds accountability, and that cannot be right.
Nick, always great speaking to you. I'm going to put this out there and see what my listeners think of your suggestion. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Nick Freeman is a lawyer known as Mr. Loophole.